The scorching sun hung high over the vast New Mexico territory, where endless stretches of desert met distant mountains painted in shades of purple and gold. In the capital stood the grand Ashcroft mansion, a symbol of wealth, influence, and political power. Its polished marble floors, towering columns, and carefully tended gardens reflected the success of Governor Richard Ashcroft, one of the most respected, and feared, leaders in the territory. To the public, Governor Ashcroft appeared to have everything a man could desire. He commanded soldiers, negotiated with businessmen, and was praised for bringing prosperity to the growing settlements. Newspapers admired his strength, while politicians sought his favor. Yet behind the mansion's heavy oak doors, hidden from curious eyes, lay a sorrow no amount of money could erase. His only daughter, 17-year-old Eleanor Ashcroft, was slowly fading away. She had once been a lively child with bright blue eyes and endless curiosity. As a little girl, she had chased butterflies through the gardens and begged her father to tell stories about the distant mountains. But as the years passed, a mysterious illness stole her strength. She grew thinner each month until her arms resembled delicate branches and every movement exhausted her. Her dresses, once carefully tailored, hung loosely from her frail frame. Servants whispered that she looked more like a shadow than a young woman. Doctors arrived from Boston, Philadelphia, and even Europe. Each promised a miracle. They prescribed expensive medicines, strict diets, and painful treatments. Specialists filled shelves with bottles of powders and tonics, yet Eleanor only became weaker. Every failed cure deepened the governor's frustration. "No expense is too great," Governor Ashcroft often declared. And he meant it. He spent thousands of dollars seeking answers, bringing the finest physicians to his estate. But every hopeful diagnosis ended with disappointment. Eventually, the doctors admitted what none wished to say aloud. They did not know how to save her. Outside the mansion, rumors spread through the territory. Some claimed the Ashcroft family had been cursed for the governor's harsh policies. Others insisted Eleanor suffered from a rare disease sent by God as punishment. Superstitious townsfolk whispered frightening tales whenever her name was mentioned. Governor Ashcroft dismissed every rumor publicly, but privately each whisper cut deeper than a knife. His political rivals noticed his growing distraction. During legislative meetings, they questioned his judgment. Newspapers began printing subtle criticisms, suggesting that a man unable to protect his own family could hardly protect an entire territory. The governor answered with determination, throwing himself deeper into his work. If he could not save his daughter, he would at least preserve his reputation. Yet each evening, after meetings and ceremonies ended, he climbed the quiet staircase to Eleanor's bedroom. She always greeted him with the same gentle smile. "I'm sorry to worry you, Father," she would say softly. He forced a smile in return. "You'll recover soon. The next doctor will know exactly what to do." Though he spoke confidently, both of them recognized the uncertainty behind his words. Eleanor spent most of her days staring through her bedroom window toward the distant mountains. She watched hawks circle above the desert and wondered what freedom felt like. Her tutors continued their lessons, but she found little joy in history or mathematics anymore. She longed to feel the wind against her face instead of breathing the stale air of her carefully guarded room. One autumn morning, Governor Ashcroft insisted Eleanor accompany a small military escort to a mountain retreat where the cooler climate might improve her health. Though reluctant, she agreed, hoping the journey would offer a brief escape from endless treatments and lonely confinement. The carriage rolled across dusty trails beneath an endless blue sky. Soldiers rode alongside, their rifles resting across their saddles. For the first time in months, Eleanor smiled as she admired the rugged beauty surrounding her. Without warning, distant gunfire shattered the silence. The horses panicked. Smoke rose from nearby rocks as armed Apache warriors appeared across the hillsides. The soldiers quickly formed a defensive line while shouting orders over the thunder of frightened horses. Chaos erupted. A terrified horse broke free from the carriage, dragging it wildly across rough ground. Eleanor clung to her seat as the vehicle bounced violently over rocks and dry riverbeds. Moments later, the carriage struck a fallen tree. The wooden frame splintered apart, throwing Eleanor into the sand. Everything became silent. Bruised, weak, and barely conscious, she lay alone beneath the blazing desert sun while the sounds of battle faded into the distance. The escort believed she had perished in the confusion and withdrew under heavy fire. When evening settled over the desert, Eleanor Ashcroft, the governor's precious daughter, opened her eyes to an endless wilderness. Alone, frightened, and too weak to stand, she had no idea that her life was about to change forever. The desert grew cold as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the jagged mountains. The blazing heat of the day gave way to a chilling wind that swept across the open land, carrying grains of sand through the air. Eleanor Ashcroft lay where the broken carriage had thrown her, her body aching from the violent crash. Her lips were dry, her breathing shallow, and every attempt to move sent sharp pain through her weakened limbs. She tried to call for help, but only a faint whisper escaped her lips. The soldiers were gone. Whether they had retreated or been defeated, she did not know. The silence around her was broken only by the distant howl of a coyote and the rustling of desert brush. Fear settled over her like a heavy blanket. She knew she could not survive the night alone. Hours passed. Just as darkness completely covered the valley, the sound of slow hoofbeats echoed across the sand. A lone rider emerged from the shadows. Mounted on a sturdy horse was an Apache warrior wrapped in buckskin clothing. His long black hair was tied neatly behind his shoulders, and a bow rested across his back beside a quiver of arrows. His sharp eyes scanned the ground with the caution of someone who had learned never to trust the quiet after a battle. His name was Taza. He had been following the trail left behind by the scattered soldiers, making sure no wounded members of his own people had been left behind. Instead, he found the wreckage of a shattered carriage. As he approached, he noticed movement. A young woman lay motionless beside the broken wheel. He dismounted carefully. For several moments he simply observed her. Her pale skin was covered in dust, her elegant dress was torn, and her face looked painfully thin. She was clearly the daughter of settlers, people his tribe had spent years fighting to protect their homeland against. He could have walked away. Some warriors would have. Others might have viewed her as a prisoner worth keeping for negotiation. But when Taza knelt beside her, he saw something entirely different. He saw not an enemy, but a frightened girl struggling to breathe. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes. Her vision blurred, but she recognized the feathers in his hair and the bow resting beside him. Every frightening story she had ever heard about the Apache rushed into her mind. She gasped weakly and tried to crawl backward. "Please," she whispered. Taza raised both hands slowly to show he carried no weapon. His voice was calm. "You are hurt." Although Eleanor could not understand his language, his gentle tone eased a small part of her fear. She attempted to stand but collapsed almost immediately. Taza caught her before she struck the ground. He frowned with concern. She weighed almost nothing. It felt as though he were lifting a bundle of dry sticks rather than a young woman. Carefully, he offered her a small leather pouch filled with water. Eleanor hesitated only a moment before drinking. The cool water soothed her cracked lips, and for the first time since the attack, she felt a spark of hope. Without another word, Taza lifted her onto his horse and began the long journey toward his village. The Apache camp rested in a sheltered valley surrounded by towering cliffs and cottonwood trees. Fires flickered beneath the stars as families prepared the evening meal. Children laughed while elders shared stories around the flames. Conversation stopped the moment Taza entered with the stranger. Every eye turned toward Eleanor. Several warriors stepped forward immediately. "She is a settler," one said firmly. "Why bring her here?" Another added, "Her people have brought soldiers onto our land. She should not remain among us." Taza met their gaze without anger. "She is dying," he answered quietly. "She is also someone's child." His words caused the camp to fall silent. An elderly healer named Nantan slowly approached. His weathered face showed years of wisdom, and his hands carried the scent of healing herbs gathered from the surrounding mountains. He examined Eleanor carefully. He checked her breathing, her pulse, and the weakness in her limbs. After several minutes, he looked up at the gathered villagers. "This sickness did not begin today," he said. He pointed gently toward her thin arms. "She has been starving for many seasons, not from lack of food, but from something deeper." The healer explained that fear, loneliness, constant worry, and life spent indoors could weaken both the body and the spirit. Medicines alone could never restore someone whose heart had forgotten how to live. Many remained unconvinced. Keeping the governor's daughter could bring danger to the tribe. Yet abandoning her would almost certainly mean her death. Taza looked around the circle before speaking once more. "I found her," he said. "I will care for her." The elder studied the young warrior for a long moment before nodding. "So be it." That night, Eleanor slept peacefully inside a small lodge wrapped in warm blankets instead of lying alone beneath the cold desert sky. She still had no idea where she was or what awaited her when morning came. But for the first time in many months, someone cared for her not because of her father's wealth or influence, but simply because she was a human being in need. It was the first small step toward a life neither she nor Taza could have imagined. When Eleanor Ashcroft opened her eyes the next morning, she expected to feel the same fear and weakness that had followed her since the accident. She expected pain, loneliness, and the cold emptiness of another day spent fighting a battle her body seemed unable to win. Instead, she heard birds singing. A gentle breeze moved through the opening of the small lodge where she rested. Sunlight filtered through the woven walls, creating golden patterns across the floor. For a moment, Eleanor forgot where she was. Then she remembered the crash, the desert, and the mysterious warrior who had carried her away from death. Panic returned. She sat up quickly, but her body refused to cooperate. A wave of dizziness overwhelmed her, and she nearly fell back onto the blankets. Before she could call for help, the entrance opened. Taza stepped inside carrying a bowl filled with warm food and a small container of water. He immediately noticed her fear and stopped at the doorway. Taza placed the food beside her and slowly explained through simple gestures that she needed strength. At first, Eleanor refused. She was suspicious and frightened, but hunger eventually overcame her fear. The meal was simple: fresh vegetables, roasted meat, berries, and herbs prepared by the village healer. It was nothing like the expensive dishes served at the governor's mansion, yet Eleanor noticed something she had not felt in years. Her body welcomed the nourishment. Day after day, Taza cared for her recovery. He helped her sit outside beneath the trees so she could feel the warmth of the sun. He taught her the names of plants and showed her how the Apache people used nature to heal. He encouraged her to walk a little farther each morning, never forcing her beyond what she could manage. When she became frustrated, he reminded her through gestures and a few words they had begun teaching each other. Slowly. One step. Strength comes back. At first, Eleanor struggled to understand his way of life. She had been raised in a world of grand houses, servants, and strict rules. The Apache village was different. People worked together. Children played freely. Elders were respected for their wisdom. No one measured a person's worth by their wealth or family name. For the first time, Eleanor saw a community where kindness was not something people displayed for appearances. It was simply how they lived. The greatest change came from the small moments. Taza would sit near the fire in the evenings and tell stories of his ancestors. Though Eleanor understood only parts of his words, she understood the emotions behind them. She saw his pride, his sorrow, and his love for his people. In return, she told him about her childhood, her mother who had passed away years before, and the loneliness she had carried inside the walls of her father's mansion. She admitted something she had never told anyone. "I was surrounded by people," she whispered one evening, "but I was still alone." Taza looked at her quietly. He understood. The healer had been right. Eleanor's illness was not only in her body. Her spirit had been wounded by years of sadness, isolation, and fear. But slowly, those wounds began to heal. Weeks passed. The girl who once struggled to lift a cup of water began walking through the valley. The young woman who had rarely smiled began laughing with the children of the village. Color returned to her face, and strength returned to her body. The tribe noticed the transformation. Those who had once questioned why Taza saved her began to see something different. Eleanor was not acting like a captured enemy. She was learning, helping, and respecting their traditions. Even the elders who had been cautious began accepting her presence. One afternoon, Taza watched Eleanor attempt to ride a horse for the first time. She held tightly to the saddle, nervous but determined. After a few uncertain moments, the horse moved forward, and Eleanor laughed with pure joy. It was a sound Taza had never heard from her before. A sound that proved she was no longer the fragile girl he had found dying in the desert. She was becoming someone new. Neither of them realized how deeply their lives were becoming connected. Taza had rescued Eleanor's body, but the kindness of his heart had rescued something far more important. He had given her hope. And Eleanor, in return, had reminded him that compassion could sometimes build bridges where years of conflict had only created walls. But beyond the mountains, the world had not forgotten Eleanor Ashcroft. Her father believed she was dead. And soon, he would discover that the daughter he lost had found a new family among the people he once considered his greatest enemies. For months, Governor Richard Ashcroft lived with a grief he refused to show the world. The official report had been clear. During the attack on the mountain road, his daughter's carriage had been destroyed. The soldiers who returned claimed that no one could have survived the violence and the harsh desert conditions. Search parties had traveled through the surrounding valleys, examining every trail and every piece of wreckage, but they found no sign of Eleanor. The governor had been forced to accept the truth everyone around him believed. His daughter was gone. Yet acceptance did not bring peace. Every morning, he walked past Eleanor's empty bedroom. Her books remained neatly arranged on the shelves. Her favorite chair sat beside the window where she used to watch the mountains. Her dresses still hung in the closet, untouched and waiting for someone who would never return. The mansion that had once been filled with music and conversation became a place of silence. Governor Ashcroft blamed himself. He had spent years trying to protect Eleanor by controlling every part of her life. He had surrounded her with doctors, servants, and guards, believing that wealth could shield her from suffering. But when danger finally arrived, all his power had failed. The one person he wanted to protect most had disappeared. Months later, a rumor reached the governor that changed everything. A trader traveling through the northern territories brought news of a strange story he had heard from another settlement. An Apache village was said to be sheltering a young woman from the eastern settlements. The woman had arrived weak and near death but had somehow recovered. The trader did not know her name. But he described her. A young woman with light hair. Blue eyes. A scar near her left hand from a carriage accident. Governor Ashcroft froze when he heard those details. "Where did you hear this?" he demanded. The trader explained that the story had come from travelers who had seen the woman living among the Apache people. They said she was treated with unusual respect by a warrior named Taza. The governor refused to believe it at first. Hope was dangerous. He had already lost Eleanor once. The thought of believing she might be alive only to lose her again was almost unbearable. But a father's heart does not easily surrender. Within days, Governor Ashcroft organized a search party. Soldiers prepared weapons, expecting a confrontation. Many assumed the Apache had taken Eleanor captive and that she needed to be rescued. The governor said nothing. Deep inside, he feared they might be right. After weeks of traveling through rugged land, the group finally reached the valley where the Apache village rested. The soldiers prepared themselves for battle, but the governor ordered them to wait. Something felt different. There was no chaos. No signs of violence. Instead, he saw families working together. Children running through the trees. Elders sitting peacefully near the fire. It was not the dangerous place he had imagined. Then he saw her. A young woman stood near the edge of the village, carrying a basket of herbs. She wore simple clothing instead of the expensive dresses of the Ashcroft mansion. Her hair was tied back, and her face carried the healthy color that had disappeared years before. But there was no mistaking her. Eleanor. The word escaped his lips like a prayer. She turned. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Eleanor ran toward him. Her father embraced her tightly, overwhelmed by a mixture of joy, disbelief, and regret. He held the daughter he thought he had buried and felt the strength in her arms, a strength she had not possessed when he last saw her. "My child," he whispered. "How are you alive?" Eleanor stepped back and looked at him. "I was saved." The governor looked toward the Apache warriors standing nearby, especially Taza. He expected to see a captor. Instead, he saw a protector. Taza stood quietly, giving Eleanor the choice to decide what happened next. That simple act confused the governor more than anything. A man he had been taught to fear had shown his daughter more respect than many people within his own world. Eleanor told her father everything. She explained how Taza had found her dying in the desert. How he had carried her to safety. How the healer had cared for her. How the entire community had helped her recover. She did not speak like a prisoner describing her captors. She spoke like someone describing family. Governor Ashcroft listened in silence. For years, he had believed strength came from authority, weapons, and control. Yet the man standing before him had possessed none of those things when he found Eleanor. He had simply chosen compassion. The governor looked at his daughter carefully. She was no longer the fragile young woman he remembered. She was confident. Healthy. Alive. And he finally understood something painful. The world he had trusted to save her had failed. But kindness from a stranger had succeeded. Still, the governor knew that bringing Eleanor home would not be simple. Many settlers would demand revenge. Many Apache warriors would never trust him. Years of conflict could not disappear overnight. A choice had to be made. Would he take his daughter away and continue the hatred between two peoples? Or would he listen to the lesson Eleanor had learned in the mountains? For the first time in his life, Governor Richard Ashcroft faced a battle that could not be won with power. It could only be won with understanding. The morning after Governor Richard Ashcroft found his daughter alive, the Apache Valley was filled with uncertainty. For Eleanor, the reunion with her father should have been the happiest moment of her life. She had imagined many times what it would feel like to return home, to see familiar faces, and to step once again into the grand mansion where she had grown up. But standing between her father and the Apache people, she realized something had changed. The place she once called home was no longer the only place where she belonged. She looked at the governor and saw the pain in his eyes. He was still her father, the man who had held her hand when she was a child and stayed beside her through every illness. But she also looked toward Taza and the people who had saved her when they had no reason to do so. She could not abandon either side. Governor Ashcroft wanted to take Eleanor back immediately. "Your place is with your family," he told her gently. Eleanor looked at him with sadness. "You are my family," she answered. "But so are the people who gave me a second chance at life." The governor was silent. He had expected gratitude toward him. He had expected his daughter to be frightened and desperate to return to civilization. Instead, she stood before him as a stronger woman than the one he had lost. During the following days, tension grew throughout the valley. The soldiers accompanying the governor watched the Apache warriors carefully. The Apache people watched the soldiers with equal suspicion. Years of conflict had created wounds that could not disappear simply because one young woman had returned alive. Many settlers believed Eleanor had been held against her will. Many Apache warriors feared the governor had come only to take her away and bring more soldiers into their lands. The smallest mistake could lead to violence. Eleanor understood this better than anyone. She had lived on both sides of the conflict. She knew the fears each group carried. She had heard the stories told by settlers, and she had listened to the memories of Apache elders who had lost their homes and loved ones. She realized that both sides were trapped by the pain of the past. One evening, Eleanor walked with Taza beneath the stars. "I don't want them to fight," she said quietly. Taza looked toward the distant mountains. "People remember pain longer than kindness," he replied. Eleanor nodded. "Then someone has to remind them." The next morning, she made a decision. She gathered both groups together. The soldiers stood on one side. The Apache warriors stood on the other. Every person waited to see what would happen. Eleanor stepped forward. "My father came here because he believed I needed saving," she began. "But I was not a prisoner. I was given compassion when I had nothing left." She turned toward Taza. "This man saved my life." Then she faced the governor. "But my father also loved me. He searched for me when everyone believed I was gone." Her voice grew stronger. "I refuse to choose hatred over the people I love." The valley became silent. Governor Ashcroft looked at his daughter and realized she was no longer asking permission to live her life. She was asking him to see the world differently. For the first time, he lowered his guard. He approached Taza. The two men stood facing each other, one representing a powerful government, the other representing a people who had spent years defending their land. Neither trusted the other. But both cared about Eleanor. "I owe you a debt I cannot repay," the governor finally said. Taza studied him carefully. "Your daughter is not a debt," he answered. "She is a person." Those words stayed with the governor. No wealth. No title. No political power. Just a simple truth. Over the next several weeks, difficult conversations began. There were arguments, disagreements, and moments when old anger returned. Peace was not created overnight. But people began listening. The governor agreed to meet with Apache leaders instead of sending soldiers first. The Apache elders agreed to discuss their concerns instead of assuming betrayal. Eleanor remained at the center of every conversation. She shared what she had learned, that strength was not found in domination, but in understanding. Taza also played a crucial role. Although some Apache warriors questioned whether peace with settlers was possible, they respected his wisdom and his willingness to protect both his people and Eleanor. Slowly, the impossible began to happen. Enemies began sitting at the same fire. Stories replaced accusations. Questions replaced threats. The governor returned to his territory changed. He was still a leader, but he no longer believed leadership meant forcing others to obey. He began using his influence to create agreements that protected both settlers and Apache communities. Eleanor had returned to the world she was born into, but she carried with her the lessons of the world that saved her. She knew the path ahead would not be easy. Peace was fragile. Trust took time. But for the first time in many years, two groups that had only known conflict began to imagine a different future. And at the center of that future stood a young woman who had once been considered too weak to survive. The daughter of a governor. The friend of an Apache warrior. A bridge between two worlds. Years passed after the day Governor Richard Ashcroft entered the Apache Valley searching for his lost daughter and discovered something far greater than a family reunion. He discovered a truth that changed the way he viewed the world. Before Eleanor disappeared, Governor Ashcroft believed strength came from power. He believed a strong leader was one who commanded armies, controlled decisions, and defeated every challenge through determination. But his daughter's journey had taught him something different. True strength was not found in controlling others. It was found in understanding them. The agreement between the settlers and the Apache people was not perfect. There were still disagreements, fears, and people who refused to accept change. Years of conflict had created deep wounds, and no single treaty could erase them overnight. But something important had begun. People were talking. They were no longer meeting only on battlefields. They were meeting around tables, sharing stories, and learning that the people they once feared were not so different from themselves. Eleanor became the heart of this new connection. When she returned to the governor's mansion, many expected her to forget the Apache village and return to her old life. They thought the months she spent away were simply a strange chapter that would eventually fade. They were wrong. Eleanor carried the lessons of the mountains with her. She remembered how the Apache healer had cared for her when she was weak. She remembered how Taza had saved her without asking for anything in return. She remembered a community that had welcomed her when she had no strength, no wealth, and no family beside her. She decided that she wanted others to experience the same compassion. Using her family's influence, Eleanor helped establish healing centers throughout the territory. These places welcomed both settlers and indigenous people. Doctors worked alongside traditional healers, combining different forms of knowledge to help those in need. Many people questioned her ideas at first. Why help those who were once our enemies? Some asked. Eleanor always gave the same answer. Because suffering does not belong to one group of people. Her words slowly changed minds. Children who grew up hearing stories of hatred began hearing stories of cooperation instead. Young settlers learned about Apache traditions, while Apache children learned new skills that helped their communities thrive. The greatest change, however, was within Governor Ashcroft himself. The man who once saw the Apache people only as a threat became one of the strongest supporters of peaceful relations. He admitted publicly that his greatest mistake had been judging people without knowing them. During one important gathering between leaders from both communities, he stood before the crowd and spoke about his daughter. "I spent years trying to protect Eleanor with walls, guards, and wealth," he said. "But when she truly needed saving, it was the kindness of a stranger that gave her life back." He looked toward Taza, who stood among the Apache leaders. "I thought I was bringing my daughter home," the governor continued. "But she was the one who brought me home, to a better understanding of what humanity means." The crowd listened quietly. Taza never sought recognition for what he had done. He believed compassion was not something to be rewarded, it was something every person had the ability to offer. Yet Eleanor knew the truth. Without him, she would never have discovered the strength hidden inside herself. Years later, stories of Eleanor Ashcroft spread across the territory. Some called her a diplomat. Others called her a healer. Many simply remembered her as the woman who helped two communities see each other differently. But Eleanor never forgot the frightened young woman she had once been, the girl lying alone in the desert, certain that her life was ending. She remembered the warrior who found her. The man who could have walked away but chose kindness instead. Taza and Eleanor remained connected throughout their lives, their bond built not on obligation or rescue, but on respect, trust, and a love that had grown from compassion. Their story became a reminder that people are often changed by the kindness they receive when they least expect it. The governor's daughter had once been known as the fragile girl who could not be saved. But history remembered her differently. She was the woman who crossed a divide between two worlds. She was the daughter who transformed her father's heart. And she was the proof that sometimes the greatest victories are not won through battles, but through love.